Hello and welcome to my BookTube channel, Jack in the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. In today's video, I am ranking all the books that I read in the month of July, from my least favorite to my most favorite. I categorize these in 4 ways. There's an uncategorized category, books that I disliked, liked, and loved. And I will leave chapters down below so you can skip around if there's one category that you care more about. And I will also link related reading vlogs in the description box down below so you can see more details about some of these books. First, a little bit of a life update because it does relate to my mood and how my reading month went, but in an earlier video I mentioned that I lost one of these sapphire stones in the ring that I love to wear every single day. And everybody was so nice wishing me luck to find the stone, and unfortunately I have not found the stone. But I'm still wearing the ring because I love it, and it's just gaping like a missing tooth, and I'm so sad. I still have to go to the jeweler to see how much it is to get a replacement stone. And then I was setting up to do this video and I lost a nail. I'm so mad because this month I have been so stressed with life. Primarily my professional life has been very stressful, and so I chewed off all my acrylic nails. That's how stressed I was. And if you've never had nails before, that's hard to do and it's kind of painful, but I did it. And so I just got my nails redone a couple days ago, and this one just popped off. So that's just an example of how life is going for me right now. As you can imagine, when things get stressful, your mood really narrows for what kind of books that you want to immerse yourself in. You want something that's going to distract you, something that you can completely get lost in, and I was a little bit finicky this month. So let's talk about the books in the unranked category and what landed them here. So firstly, I read 2 Spanish books that really helped me stay on my goal of learning other languages. I'm still taking Spanish classes 3 times a week and trying to incorporate my favorite hobby, reading, in with that hobby of language learning. So firstly, I am finishing up the audiobook for Pimsleur 3 Spanish. And I'm not quite done yet, but I knew this was going to be in the unranked category, and I still have a couple days left of July actually. So I'm going to finish listening to this in the next couple days. And this is one, I read one last month. I read the level 2. And this is really good because it has English and Spanish phrases. And I love listening to the audiobook from Libby so that I can practice listening and speaking out loud, because I do talk back to the audiobook. The only thing that's kind of difficult is they use the formal usted a lot, and I want to practice more with the informal too. So that's one call out with the Pimsleur program if you're interested in learning Spanish, but it is what it is. I also checked out a children's book from Kindle Unlimited. It was called La Suerte de Ser un Gato Negro. And that was really fun. I thought it would be a picture book, and it turned out to be a chapter book. I think it's for ages 6 through 10. And it was still a little bit challenging for me. I need a little bit lower. I need more pictures. If you are someone also interested in learning Spanish, something to call out about this KU book is it is written in Castilian Spanish, so Spanish from Spain. So it's a little bit of a different dialect, some different vocabulary, some different grammar, but hey, it was useful, it served its purpose, and it was kind of cute. I always put language books in the unranked category because it's not really fair to compare them for writing style and plot and characters and all that, because my enjoyment of it is really for my goal of learning another language. So they're great for their intended purpose, but they're unranked. I also had 3 DNFs this month, and nothing was wrong with them. I will actually probably pick them all up at a later point. It just wasn't the right mood. Firstly, I had the audiobook for September House, and this horror book has been on my radar for a while. My hold became available on Libby. That's why I checked it out. And it was very creative and fun about a house that's haunted in the month of September. And it's very gruesome hauntings. But it was making me feel a little bit anxious, and so it just wasn't the right time for me. And then I also picked up Cloud Cuckoo Land, which was just so complex right off the bat, and I needed something a little bit more calming, a little bit more simple. So I'm going to save this for when I can give it a fair chance. And then Our Share of Night, I actually read 100 pages of it, and it was kind of the opposite of this. It was too slow. And it still had some complexity with the horror and the magical elements, the supernatural paranormal elements, but it was so slow at 100 pages that I was having a hard time focusing. So those are my DNFs for the month. Now let's get into the actual rankings. We are going to go lowest to highest, and we are starting with the disliked category. The book that I disliked reading the most in the month of July was Sundial, a thriller horror by Catriona Ward. There were a lot of POVs in this book and a couple different characters, and I did not like any of them. I was kind of rooting for all of them to die. So that was a little bit difficult. And when I mean I don't care, I mean even at 90%, when things should be at like the peak climax of the story for like a thriller horror type book, I didn't care. Like I really thought about DNFing it at 90% because I was so disconnected from it. But I kept going, and I mean it ended fine. It was a creative ending. Huge trigger warning in this one for cruelty to animals or animal abuse, because there is animal testing on dogs, which I did not know when I hauled this book, but someone was nice enough to comment on one of my videos and warn me about. And it was constant. I skimmed over all of it, but it was very, very frequent throughout the book. Since I was prepared for it going in, I don't like it, but that's not the reason this is so low in the rankings. I just couldn't connect with it. I couldn't connect and I couldn't care. A book that I enjoyed slightly more than that one was Chain Gang All-Stars, a sci-fi written by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I was so optimistic going into this book because it is a sci-fi with kind of like a battle to the death for prisoners, and the winner at the end of these games gets their freedom. And I was so optimistic for that plot, but also the commentary on the American prison system. I thought there would be great commentary on the poverty cycle and how our prison system equally impacts people of color. And I was preparing myself for a very impactful read. However, the commentary was mostly in footnotes, which was well researched, but I wanted to like feel it. I wanted that commentary to come to life in this very creative plot, and it just fell flat for me. And the author tried to show like how the whole society views like violence and death as entertainment by doing so many different POVs from people like out in the public, like viewing this stuff on TV, that it lost its effect for me. Again, I'm very disconnected from the characters and the plot, and like I wasn't invested in what was happening to them because it was just so scattered all over the place. So I did not get what I wanted from this, and it just felt kind of chaotic. I am so sorry to tell you guys that this next book, this BookTube darling, is in the disliked category. The book I'm talking about is When the Moon Hatched, a fantasy romance by Sarah A. Parker. You guys, this book started out so strong. I was so enthusiastic when I picked this up on Kindle Unlimited that I actually ordered the paperback because I was so in love. But if you check out the reading vlog where I was reading this, you will see that it was a slow downward spiral of my enjoyment of this. Now, when it started off, I loved the world. I loved the magic. I loved this snarky female main character who was also a powerful, badass warrior fighter person. Those are the things that I love starting off. Then in like the middle section, when we focus on the romance, it was so gross. The chemistry sucked. Their banter sucked. It was so repetitious that like I was so annoyed, and that quirky, witty attitude of the female main character became mind-numbingly stupid. I couldn't stand it. So that middle section really got me. But then when we went back towards the end to focus on the plot and the more reveals were happening, I was kind of into it. So I'm really into the magic and the plot and the world. I don't like the characters, and I don't like the romance. So those are pretty big like characteristics in a fantasy romance. So I'm putting this in the disliked category, but I actually really do want to read book 2. So I know that sounds kind of hypocritical, but it works in my head. The next book on the list is the last one in the disliked category. So I disliked it the least, or I liked it the most of the disliked, however you want to call it. The book is Edge Dancer, a fantasy novella by Brandon Sanderson. Edge Dancer is intended to be read in between books 2 and 3 of the Stormlight archives, so that's why I picked it up. I liked the plot, I liked the magic that I'm kind of introduced to from reading the Stormlight archives so far. I did not like the POV of a 10-year-old. She was kind of frustrating to read from. I hated the repetition of the word awesome or awesomeness, which is how she refers to her power. And I get Brandon Sanderson's trying to be humorous and quirky because our character gets her power like replenished from eating. So she's always talking about how hungry she is. She's always talking about food. And it was just like this forced humor from this 10-year-old that like really grated on my nerves. So I mean, I like the Stormlight Archives, and that's why I like the world and the magic and like the context of this story, but the character herself and the point of this novella, not so much. Now let's talk about the books that I liked in the month of July. So the lowest one on the list is Ultra Processed People, The Science Behind Food That Isn't Food, a nonfiction by Chris Von Telekin. I read this book on my Kindle. I checked it out through Libby. I'm going to go ahead and paste some of the Kindle highlights that I captured throughout reading this book that I thought were kind of interesting, help you determine if you want to read this book. I found it incredibly fascinating. I learned a lot about ultra-processed food, or UPF, as it's referred to throughout the book. I learned why it's used, why companies want to use this, even though it's so unhealthy for us. Spoiler alert, it's because it increases shelf life and makes things ultimately cheaper. I learned that there are certain demographics that are more prone to eating more UPF, and that was kind of sad and kind of disturbing. I mean, we really target these neighborhoods stricken by poverty, or these demographics really stricken by poverty. And, you know, it talks about how advertisements are so effective, but the majority of people that see these advertisements are the ones who won't pay for commercial-free streaming or video games. How these things target children in particular, how we market to children so they eat more of this stuff, and the impacts of it, not only individually the health impacts, but as a society the impacts. And what was really interesting about this is the author is a twin, and both he and his twin have the genetics that expose them to, or their predisposition for obesity, and how obesity has affected each of them differently. Like, they both have the same genetic makeup for this, but because of their environment, how they've been exposed to UPF differently and the consequences of it. So very fascinating. This was my first like nutrition nonfiction. I found it very fascinating, very relevant. I think I'd actually like to buy a physical copy of this so I could do more highlights and refer back to them. The thing that keeps us out of the loved category was that it dove too much into the science and dove too much into the like supporting studies of the facts that were mentioned, and that kind of lost me a little bit. But there was one study that was very fascinating with babies, like toddlers, that every day the same foods were put in front of them. And it was interesting to track over this course of time which foods they gravitated towards eating. And what was interesting about it is what they gravitated towards was what they were deficient in. Like, if they were gravitating towards broccoli for a couple days, that had some nutritional element that they were deficient in. So it's like, what the study proved is that our bodies, if we listen to it, if we're not influenced by all this other junk, our bodies will naturally gravitate towards the nutrients in the foods that we need. So that was really insightful. So there were some studies that were interesting, but overall, this lands in the liked category because it just got too detailed for me. The book that I liked the most in the month of July was Oathbringer, Book 3 of the Stormlight Archive, a fantasy series written by Brandon Sanderson. I have lots to say about Oathbringer, but I think you can check out the dedicated reading vlog that I did for it, which is video number 3 in a series where I am reading all of the books in the Stormlight Archives. So that video is dedicated to this 1,200-page behemoth of a fantasy novel. And I liked this because I love the characters. I truly, truly love majority of the characters. Shallan is a female main character that I was not enjoying, and I mentioned in that reading vlog, she alone made me want to DNF the book in the series because she was so frustrating with her insecurities. But besides that, I love all the characters. I love the reveals and the twists that are coming. There was like a twist or reveal about the Voidbringers that blew my mind, and I'm so excited to see where the story goes. What keeps us out of the loved category and what keeps us from even being a 5-star is that I'm so confused. This is so complex. So complex that I understand the macro plot, but I'm getting really frustrated at how dumb I feel when there's a huge reveal and I'm like, okay, I can tell this is important, but I'm missing the impact of it. I'm missing that like jaw-dropping feeling because I don't fully understand all the intricacies, and I'm book 3, like we're like 3,500 pages in at this point, and I'm so frustrated. But I love making these vlogs because I've gotten some killer comments from you guys, like helping me to understand, and I've gotten some messages on Instagram. Like, I love making these videos because it's like a community read at this point, and you guys are really making this worthwhile. Like, I think some of these comments and these explanations are like bumping up the whole series rating like a whole star, because I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Really, really cool. Now, let's move on to the loved category. And let's talk about my favorite read for the month of July, which is the Neapolitan series, a historical fiction series written by Elena Ferrante. This is also one where I have a dedicated reading vlog for it, and it is quite the experience because each book is not 5 stars, but the series overall I think really is 5 stars. This series is great for readers who want a historical fiction. This takes place in the 1950s in Naples, Italy, but it's not centered around war. Like, a historical fiction that's not about World War II? I mean, wow. Book 1 in this series might look familiar. It's called My Brilliant Friend. This whole series is translated from Italian, and I really, really found this fascinating. It's such a great exploration of complex female friendships and this desire to escape poverty and escape the life of your mother in your neighborhood and the identity crisis. It's like a coming of age. We follow these 2 girls from 5 years old up until when they're grandmothers. And it's so fascinating to me how I can admire a character so much and be inspired by them so much, but also be so disgusted by them at some times. I really lived another life in these novels, and it's so character driven. But I love the characters, but I don't agree with all their decisions. And I was so frustrated with them at times, but I just love how they were portrayed. This was a very profound series for me. I'm so glad that I read it. And please check out that reading vlog. I know it's a little bit of a long one, but I talk about 4 different books, and I read some of the writing too that really moved me. And please check it out, because maybe this series is for you, and it could be just as impactful for you as it was for me in the month of July. That feels like a real rapid fire ranking of the books that I read this month, but as you can tell, my mood really, really impacted what I was reading. The reason that the Neapolitan series was my favorite was this was the best escapism that I had for the month. This really paired the mood that I was in, where I like complexity. It was complex in terms of the characters and the relationships, but I think I needed something more immersive. Like, I didn't need the heavy world building of like an epic fantasy like the Stormlight archives. So I think my mood really, really impacted my enjoyment of books or what I was looking for. But that is a-okay. And I love making these videos because I like to maybe help you identify what books would pair with different moods that you're in as a reader. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this monthly reading wrap-up where I rank all the books that I read in the month from worst to best. I hope you had lots of 5-star reads in July, and I hope you have 5-star reads going into August as well. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.